as history has it, we know that the true killers of Malcolm, some of them came from where I'm from that temple that I used to be with. And I had very close contact with those individuals, very close contact, to the point where to this day, I still say that they were some of my mentors in the Nation of Islam. I was one of those people at the age of 22 that took that Shahada with hundreds, if not thousands of people all around the United States. That's when I was introduced to Salafia, 1979. And I didn't actually come into Salafia until 2 years after that, which was 1981. But in those days, the people who ascribed to Salafia, there was no fitna. Everybody was together. Those were some of the best days, because in those days, we didn't call to buildings and personalities. We call to Allah. It's like Sheikh Mukbil said, rahimahullah, that the true Salafi caller, he connects the people to their creator. He does not connect the people and tie the people to personalities. That's what we were about then. The 90s, we started seeing changes, and unfortunately, I became affected by that shift. I've already apologized to him and maybe 6 or 7 other people, and even that was frowned upon. Some of the brothers that ascribe to Salafia are now doing what is called historical negationism, where they're trying to remove people like myself from the history by not mentioning me or by not mentioning specific people who had a direct impact even on them. And now they're to the point they're saying, that was nostalgia. Forget that. That wasn't the golden days. That Dawa was weak. But it's the same Dawa that brought you to Salafia. Every single person in that room said they came to Salafia either by me or by someone who came by me. Once again, this is not braggadocio. I'm not bragging. I'm only saying that was after Allah's mercy and his fadl upon me, his bounty upon me, and then following the methodology of Shaykh Al-Albani, that was able to happen. I know that Salafi is the truth. I know that. And I know that there's no other aqidah or methodology other than the way of the Salaf. I'm a firm believer in that. But some of this stuff, it ain't Salafiyah. If I didn't know any better, Sajid, I would say that you were trying to set me up and get me in trouble. But
not me. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome all viewers. Alhamdulillah, today we have a very special guest. Inshallah, we are going to be covering some very important history regarding Islam in America. And inshallah, this is just going to be the first of several interviews. His name is Shaykh Dawud Adib. He was born in Newark, New Jersey, and he embraced Islam in 1975, shortly after he began seeking knowledge and giving dawah. Without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Shaykh Dawud Adib. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So this has been a long time in the making. We've been, talking about doing this for a long time. Alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful. JazakumAllahukhairan. I'm very excited to benefit from your story. I know there's a lot of important history. So, inshallah, without further ado, if you take a look at this picture in the background, I know this says this is related to where you were born, where you come from. So if you don't mind beginning with that, with where you were born and growing up.
Yes, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillahi amma ba'd. As you have mentioned, and as I mentioned to you before we started recording for this interview, that you have to get it right. There is a Newark, Delaware, and a Newark, New Jersey. And the people in Delaware who come from Newark, they don't want you to pronounce it like my hometown. And likewise, we don't want you to pronounce it like their hometown. So it's Newark, New Jersey, not Newark, New Jersey. And yes, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, in a Christian family, urban life, the hood, ghetto, whatever you want to call it. And I was born in the year that Eisenhower was the president. So anybody who was a history buff, then you know what time I was born, in the time period that I was born. I came up, as I said, in a Christian family. My mother, to this day, may Allah guide her to Islam and improve her condition. She'll be 94 in a couple of days, 96 on the Islamic calendar. She was more religious than my father. My father was a Christian on paper, but my mother and my mother's side, more specifically, my maternal grandparents, were very, very religious, very religious. And my brother and I only have one sibling, my brother and I, we basically came up in a really solid family, and very solid Christian family. And, mostly because of my mother. So basically that's the beginning. I was born in the 50s. So I'm a child of the 60s. Born in the 1950. I was born in 1953. Yes, that picture there of the projects that I grew up in the background is a 1944 circa. The circa I think is 1944 or 46. You can see those cars. Those were really, really old cars. And those projects are called Baxter Terrace projects on the north side of Newark, New Jersey. Yes.
So I guess what was it like growing up in the community? What were most other families also very Christian, such as yours?
Well, I would say this particular project, housing project, for a good time it was segregated. The blacks and the Latinos were on one side, and the whites were on the other side. That's before my time. And when I was born, that's around the time that they changed it. So it was a very nice situation. Believe it or not, in those days, you could hang your clothes, your laundry out in the court in front of your building. People didn't steal from you. Everybody got along. The white people, the black people, the Spanish-speaking people, everybody got along. There was no problems. I didn't have to worry about getting robbed. I didn't know anything about drugs. I didn't know anything about any criminality. I had no knowledge of it whatsoever.
MashaAllah. So what was it like growing up? What sort of thing were you into?
Believe it or not, well, my father, he graduated from the prestigious university, an African-American university, Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Growing up, and when he came to Newark, that's how I'm here. He met my mother, right? She's from Newark also. So growing up in my household was a very musical household. And I was singing at a very, very young age. I had a microphone in my hand when I was like 5 years old. And actually, I wanted to pursue. I was a very famous singer in Newark, New Jersey. And I wanted to pursue a career in music, and specifically singing. So my upbringing was basically from three angles. It was music, Christianity, and education, going to school. That's it. Music, Christianity, and education. And we went to church, I would say maybe 2 times a week, sometimes 3 times per week. And I used to belong to this thing called a junior church. It was for the kids, where they practiced being like the pastor of the church. And I was really entrenched in Christianity. I really, really was entrenched in Christianity. And then at the age of 14, we moved from Newark to Orange, New Jersey. And that's when my whole life changed.
MashaAllah. Well, before we get there, it's interesting you mentioned music, because for those who may not have a Christian background like us, singing is like a major aspect that Christians consider to be worship, right? I think even maybe perhaps most of church services, singing and music and things like that. So when you talk about coming from a religious background, how much of that was just sort of singing, and how much of it was knowledge-based? Because apparently you had inclinations towards both. I mean, was there a lot of theology, Christian theology, that you believed in and knew about? Or
yeah, I mean, you're talking about a kid, 11, 12, 13 years of age. And I had just the basic stuff. But my mother, once again, to this day, as I said, may Allah guide her, the influence of religion, and because she was also a singer. And there's some very famous singers, maybe when another interview, I'll tell you some of those singers are that were right in that area, that my mother actually, a group of her, a group she was in, actually competed against some people who became internationally known singers. So, but for me, singing was more prevalent in my heart than religion. Way more prevalent than religion. I was a religious kid in the sense that I came from a family, my mother and father didn't use profanity. I never used profanity. I will challenge anybody to this day anybody on the face of the planet that can say that they ever heard me use a word of profanity. I didn't smoke cigarettes. You couldn't smoke nobody smoked cigarettes in the house. Nobody drank alcohol in my house. Nobody gambled in my house. Well, my father did a little lotto and things like that. But basically, it was a very, very strict religious household. But singing was number one for me. That was it. In fact, my father and I were on a train going to Alabama to see my paternal grandparents. And a lady, I was singing a Sam Cooke. Maybe some of you guys don't know Sam Cooke, you're too young. But I was singing a Sam Cooke song. I must have been about 6 years old. And my father and I were sitting, and the lady was sitting behind us on the train on our way to Alabama from Newark. And I was singing a Sam Cooke song. And it was a white lady. And she reached over, she said, "Whoa, that boy can sing," right? And so she reached into her purse and she gave my father a $5 bill, right? She said, "This is for that. He's going to be something one day." She told my father, right? So later on, when I came to Islam in my 20s, around my 30s, I think it was, I'm sitting in the kitchen talking to my father. I said, "Daddy, remember that lady that gave you the $5 for me when I was singing on the train?" And he said, "Yeah, what about it?" I said, "Whatever happened to that $5? So my father used the D word, the D bomb. He said, "Boy, do you know how many $5, how many $5 I've given you in the past years?" So for me, it was just singing, and religion wasn't really that prevalent in my heart as much as singing was,
That's really interesting, subhanAllah. It makes me think of like the people of Nuh alayhi salam and how they sort of innovated in building statues, which eventually led to people worshiping the statues. Because as I hear your history as well, and I also reflect on mine and what I see today, Christianity being so entrenched in singing and music, we've seen how over the years that has sort of, turned into a religion itself. I think I grew up taking on music as a religion, and I think that's taken over, subhanAllah. But you mentioned that, and then you moved, and then things started to change. So what? Let's get into that, inshallah.
Yeah, what happened was we moved, and I remember because the school that I went to, the elementary school, which is right down the street from those projects, actually on that same side of the street, and we moved. So I was in from kindergarten to the 8th grade, and I didn't get a chance to graduate from that school in the 8th grade because we moved to Orange, New Jersey. And in my mind, even though my maternal grandfather and grandmother lived in Orange, in my mind as a kid, Orange, New Jersey was like, I'm leaving all my friends in Newark. I'm going to this far place, and it's only like 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away, Newark, East Orange, Orange. So we get to Orange, New Jersey. I'm 14 years old, and some guys they knocked on my apartment door. Two black guys with bow ties. They had Muhammad Speaks newspaper, right? And so when I opened the door, I said, "Who is it?" They said, "The Muslims." So I don't know I don't know what a Muslim is, from the Pentecostal church. I opened up the door, the two guys with the bow ties and the selling Muhammad Speaks. you know anything about Islam and Muslims? I don't know. And at that time, the paper cost 35 cents. I didn't have 35 cents. So they gave me the paper. So I take the paper, close the door, and I take the paper and started reading. And it said, do you want money, good homes, and friendship in all walks of life? Do you want freedom, justice, and equality as a black man? Okay, yeah, I want freedom, justice, and equality. I want money, good homes, and friendship all of life. So they said you had this little thing, you take out a newspaper and you fill it out and you send it in to Chicago. Next thing you know, I'm in the Nation of Islam. I think I was going on my 15th birthday. This is 1967.
Okay, so this was shortly after Malcolm X had passed away. Right?
Shortly after Malcolm got shot. Yep.
Okay, interesting.
Yep.
Well, this is great because I feel like this area, after, like, many people are still familiar with reading his autobiography and that whole history, but I feel like after his death, there's a lot of history that hasn't gotten the same attention. So inshallah, maybe, hopefully, this interview can, enlighten us regarding some of that history, inshallah. So
yes.
Yeah, so let's take it from there. What happened next?
So now I'm in the Nation of Islam. And, one of the things, Sajid, that I don't have a lot of good qualities. I recognize and I'm thankful to Allah for the qualities that I do have that I consider good qualities. I don't have a lot, but I have, I have some good qualities. And one of the things that I know that Allah has blessed me with and favored me with is the ability to speak and get people to understand things that they may not have normally been able to understand. Allah has given that as a gift to me. I talk a lot. I'm a speaker, I'm a talker, and in fact, at that school, before we moved to Orange, that elementary school down the street from the projects, I remember the teacher's name. Her name was Mrs. Sharon. On the back of the report card, they have teachers' comments, and then you put the parents' comments. I don't know if those kind of things still exist. And on the back, because I was born David, that changed it to Dawud. On the back of the comments from the teacher, my first grade teacher, she said, David is a good student, but he talks too much, right? So that's part of my legacy, talking, right? So when I joined the Nation of Islam, Allah had decreed that I will become one of the top du'at in Newark, New Jersey. One of the top people calling to astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. I seek the forgiveness of Allah, and to him I return. Allah decreed that I would become one of the most prolific, profound callers to shirk and to kufr, to polytheism, to disbelief, teaching that Allah came in the person of a man and that Elijah Muhammad was the messenger of Allah to the black man and woman in the wilderness of North America, right? So from the ages of like 15 all the way until Elijah Muhammad died, I became as well known for that as I was for singing.
What was it about the Nation of Islam that appealed to you to, get so heavily involved?
Once again, it was that thing in the newspaper. Do you want money, good home, and friendship on all walks of life? And then when I started going to the temple, which is in Newark, and this is one of the most powerful temples in the United States, Temple 25, which is part of that history we're talking about as far as Malcolm is concerned. When I got there, I'm seeing all these people with mink coats and diamonds and beautiful cars, and I'm saying, yeah, this is it. It wasn't a religious thing for me. It was more of a nationalist thing for me. It really wasn't about the religion, But the issue of belief in God being a triune God, that was probably one of the main things that kept me close to the Nation of Islam. Not believing that Allah was the God, the Father, and the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit. That was a key thing for me, So it wasn't so much religious as it was nationalist for me. But I totally, 100% believed every single thing that Elijah Muhammad taught. I wasn't one of those guys that was in it for other reasons. No, I eventually truly believed that you, Sajid Libham, were the devil and there was no good in you whatsoever.
Well, what were some of the things that you were specifically calling the people to, when you were speaking and giving da'wah?
Well, the main thing that we, in those days, that we called the people to, three main things. Number one is that the black men and women in America have to learn the knowledge of themselves. And the knowledge of themselves, according to Elijah Muhammad's teachings, is that you are a Muslim by nature, that you're a Muslim, right? But in addition to that, every black man is also a god. Every black man is a god. So what we call to, and what I call to, and may Allah forgive me for that, and I ask him to forgive me for that, what we called to was that Allah was a man whose father's name was Alfonso, and his mother's name was Baby G, the letter G, Baby G. His father, Alfonso, was a black man. His mother was a white woman. And they came together and conceived God, the one and only God, who was born on February 27th, 1877. And you can Google him and people can see his picture and him holding supposed to be a copy of the Quran and looking at it. So this is what I call to, and that Elijah Muhammad was the messenger of Allah, and that every black man and woman, if they want to be freed from the shackles of mental death and slavery, that they have to believe in the teachings of Elijah Muhammad in order to be truly free. And we believe that, as I said, God was a man, black man, and that the angels are all black, that the devil is a white man who was not created, that he was manufactured. The man you factored, right? The man you made, right? The white man is a manufactured. In fact, we called the white man the colored man. The white man was actually the colored man, right? The Quran itself would be revised after 25,000 years, or 23 or 25,000 years, and that there's no heaven or hell after you go to the grave, that heaven is what the white man has in this world, and hell is what the black man is being subjected to in slavery and oppression. But after the grave, it's finished. It's finished. And this is basically what we call to.
One thing that comes to mind is, I know during this time, this was shortly after, as we mentioned, Malcolm X was killed, and he famously left the Nation of Islam, and he embraced, traditional Sunni Islam, and there seemed to be a split. So you sticking with the Nation of Islam during that time, what was it like in terms of that split and the different versions of Islam that perhaps were being discussed?
What I'm about to say, I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some people who are not going to like this. But in retrospect, I understand how Allah decrees things. And maybe we can talk about this in the upcoming interviews. But I came in contact in Newark with many, as you say, traditional Orthodox Sunni Muslims. There were many of them there, many different masajid. In fact, on the north side of Newark, there was a Latino masjid. The imam was Latino, the muezzin was Latino. Basically, the entire congregation on the same side of Newark that I was on, not too far away from me, north side of Newark, there was a Spanish-speaking masjid there. And then it became a Turkish masjid after that in that area. So I came in contact with a lot of people who were Orthodox Sunni Muslims. And I used to have discussions with them, and I used to have debates with them. And I used to think that I was winning the debate. when they would tell him, Dawood, how can God be a man? How can God be a man? And they would debate me, and I would come with the rhetoric and the catechisms that we learned. They call it student enrollment or lost found lesson number 1 and number 2. I would come with those things. I memorized a lot of these things. So, but one of the things that I have to really admit, that those Orthodox Sunni Muslims that I encountered, I don't know about other people in the nation, they were very, very kind to me. And they were very, very tolerant with me. And they were very, very patient with me. But they definitely believed that I was a miscreant. They definitely believed that I was a heretic. And they were right. They definitely believed that I was a deviant. And of course, worse than all of that is a disbeliever, right? So when, unfortunately, as history has it, we know that the true killers of Malcolm, some of them came from where I'm from that temple that I used to be with in Newark, New Jersey. This is, everybody knows this, or everybody that knows it knows it. So, and I had very close contact with those individuals, with that or those individuals. Very close contact, to the point where to this day, I still say that they were some of my mentors in the Nation of Islam. So what I learned was that he was a Judas. Malcolm was a Judas. He was a Benedict Arnold. He was a traitor, etc. And in fact, you go back in some of those Muhammad Speak newspapers, the cartoons, you'll see constantly these things being mentioned about him. When I joined the nation, I think it was like 3 years after he got assassinated, So when you talk about a split, and this is the thing I wanted to say that may rub some people wrong, we don't give credit to disbelief and polytheism. We don't give credit to heresy and innovations and deviations. But we have to give credit to the Nation of Islam for introducing many people to the word Allah, to the word Quran, to the word Muhammad, to the word Islam, to the word Muslim. So that, and as a result, as you already know, many, many people were affected by that and transitioned into real Islam. And especially in the prison system. And this is something that a lot of people don't know, especially in the prison system. Islam, the real Islam and the fake Islam, the Nation of Islam had a huge impact on the prison system, especially on the southeast coast and the northeast coast, especially. And they established Islam. They established the word Quran. They established the word Muslim. They established the word Allah. And for that, we are thankful for what Allah has written in the preserved tablet. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who fa'alu lima yurid. He does what he wants. But there's no doubt in my mind, because many of the people who are Muslim to this day, after Allah's mercy upon them, many of the Muslims today in Newark, New Jersey, that came to the Nation of Islam by way of me, eventually came to Orthodox Islam by way of me. Because they trusted me, they believed what I was saying. If Dawood can switch, then something must be up, right? So I don't know if this is clear what I'm saying, but that's basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who really speaks to like indigenous Muslims from the time period that you're mentioning, they're going to find what you're saying to be true, that so many people were introduced to, segments of Islam through the Nation of Islam and eventually became Orthodox Sunni Muslims. But what we don't hear a lot about, again, is because is this sort of time period after Malcolm. And one thing that I wanted to mention as well is your perspective, because as you mentioned earlier, you believed everything Elijah Muhammad said.
Everything.
Whereas Malcolm X, he was seen as a heretic and a Judas, as you put it, because he basically exposed Elijah Muhammad and alleged certain things about Elijah Muhammad, calling him a liar and exposing him to be untrustworthy and things like that. So it's natural, if you're going to stick with the Nation of Islam, I guess, that you would see Malcolm in that light. I guess how did you sort of well, how long did you stay in the nation, and how did you sort of transition out of it, I guess would be the next part.
Similar to how I left Christianity and joined the nation, it wasn't really a religious move, so to speak. I stayed in the Nation of Islam for 7 years, from 1967 to 1974, when Elijah Muhammad died, 75. Yeah. And then when his son, Warithuddin Muhammad, came, that's when I took Shahada, right, under his leadership. And I just want to make a point, if I may. There's some people who have this misunderstanding. They say that there was no such thing as a mass Shahada. What I mean by mass Shahada, some of you, maybe even yourself, you're too young to remember Sung Young Moon from Korea. I don't know if you remember him. The minister, or Reverend Sung Young Moon. You can Google him after this interview. He used to do mass weddings, have hundreds of people stand up in his congregation, and he would marry them all in one hit, right? Well, there's some people who believe, I know personally, there's some people who believe that there was no such thing as a mass Shahada, but it happened at least 3 times, and I am a product of those mass Shahadas that W.D. Muhammad did from Chicago over the speaker system. In each temple around the United States, we would have people stand up and say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's above his throne in the manner befitting his majesty, and Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the messenger of Allah. I was one of those people at the age of 22 that took that Shahada with hundreds, if not thousands of people all around the United States. So when I came in again, it wasn't really an issue of understanding La ilaha illallah and understanding Muhammad Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah raise his rank and grant him peace. It was, this is the son of Elijah Muhammad. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to do what he said. And that's what I did. And the year after that, everything changed again.
Well, before we get to that, I just want to say jazakallah khair for sharing that history, because like I mentioned, the autobiography of Malcolm X and that history, for people from my generation and later, people still read that book and kind of trace back this mass conversion, you can say, to Sunni Islam, to him. But there was this time period that you're mentioning where there were other people involved, there were many people still transitioning after that. And even the Malcolm X movie, I think, came out in the 90s, which, further just shows that it was many years after his death where people were still embracing Islam. And there are many people in this country that helped contribute to that. And, that's some of the stuff that we want to highlight. One of the many things we want to highlight in this interview, inshallah. But so moving from there, you said things changed again. So let's get to that.
Yeah, things changed again. In fact, I'm going to, as we move on with these interviews, a series of interviews, I'm going to provide you with some pictures that you may be able to utilize on some key places and key people that had an impact on my life. And one of them was, and I get a little emotional with this. It's difficult to not get kind of teary-eyed. There was a brother, he called himself Abdullah. His last name was Smith, was Donnie Smith, rahimahullah, wa ghafarallahu lahu. And he was the one who introduced me to the real Orthodox Sunni Islam. So keep in mind, I'm with W.D. Muhammad now, 1975. And so between 1975 and late 1976 is when I met Donnie. And I'll give you a picture of Donnie, right? I met Donnie. And Donnie, one day, we left Orange, New Jersey and moved to Irvington, New Jersey. So from Newark to Orange to Irvington. So one day, Donnie comes up, he drives up to my house, my mother's house, my mother and father's house. I remember the color of his car. I remember the make and model of his car. he said, Dawood, I want you to show you something. And he brings out this book called An Analytical Critique of Qadianism.
Wow.
An Analytical Critique of Qadianism, which is, if the viewers don't know what Qadianism is, to us, many of us, we call them the Ahmadis, Ahmadiyya movement, right? So he said, bring this book out of W.D. Muhammad. I had this book of W.D. Muhammad. So he's sitting behind the wheel in his Chevrolet Caprice, right? I'm sitting in the passenger seat. He has that book on his lap. I have this book on my lap. He starts flipping the pages. This is 1976. He says, read this. I read it. He said, now read this, what you have in your book. Sajid, it was almost word for word, just that the time period was up from Ghulam Mirza Ahmed, from the Qadianis. It was almost exactly word for word. W.D. Muhammad was saying almost exactly word for word what Ghulam Mirza Ahmed was saying. Almost word for word. Almost like a plagiarism. I find out later that he was with the Ahmadis for about 5 years, I think in Guyana, right? So now Donnie is saying, Dawood, this is not it. I'm going to take you, and I have the picture of that Sheikh also. I'll give you the picture for that. I'm going to take you to Jersey City, New Jersey. I want you to meet Sheikh Muhammad Hilmi, rahimahullah. He was from Egypt, and he had started in a markaz for Islamic studies and Quran and Arabic in a house he had purchased, he and his wife, rahimahullah, in Jersey City, New Jersey, called Ibad al-Rahman. Markaz Ibad al-Rahman. And that's when I was introduced to true Sunni Islam. So I stayed with W.D. Muhammad from 75 to like late 76. And Donnie is also the person that introduced me to the Arabic language. He was the one who introduced me to the Arabic language. And as I'm sitting here, subhanAllah, I'm thinking how one day he was trying to explain to me, this is 1976, what is al-idafa, the mudaf and mudaf ilayh, the construct phrase. This is 1976. And I just couldn't, I said, I don't understand what this is. Fast forward, by 1980, I'm teaching Arabic.
MashaAllah.
Yeah.
MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah.
So what were some of the key differences in terms of like theology and belief that you began believing when you were, as you put it, finally sort of introduced to Orthodox Islam? I mean, what were some of those fine-tuned changes, I guess?
You mean from, not the nation, because we don't know about it. You mean with the W.D. Muhammad period?
Right, that sort of intermediary, yes. Like you from taking that mass shahada to then, as you put it, being introduced to like Orthodox Islam.
Well, one of the things that was key and that I was able to, in retrospect, go back to those Orthodox Muslims in Newark when I used to have those debates with them. Basically, what Sheikh Muhammad Hilmi, rahimahullah, was teaching me was the exact same thing that they would teach me, with one basic exception. Well, more than one, but one really main exception is that the Sunni Islam of Sheikh Muhammad Hilmi wasn't Sufism. The guys that I was debating in Newark were upon some type of tasawwuf, some type of Sufism. Because I used to read a lot of books when Elijah Muhammad died. In between that period and when I met Donnie, I used to read Shia books, Sufi books. I was reading all kinds of things. So I had to have Sahih Muslim over here and Sayyid Nursi over here, you know. So, but with Muhammad Hilmi, rahimahullah, who was from Cairo, Egypt, some of the main things I learned was the Tawheed of Allah and the intricacies on my level of understanding the Tawheed of Allah and the importance, which is not done too much amongst us who ascribe to the Sunnah, the seerah of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was something that was really, he really drove that home. You have to memorize the Quran, Dawood. You have to learn the Arabic language and learn it well. And you have to know the seerah of your prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Sahaba. Constantly, he talked about the Sahaba, the Sahaba, the Sahaba, the Sahaba. Constantly, he talked about that. And that really made me take off until 3 years later, 3 years after that, being with him. That's when I was introduced to Salafia, 1979. And I didn't actually come into Salafia until 2 years after that, which was 1981.
Okay, let's get into that. But before we do so, I just wanted to point out, you can see why Salafia would specifically appeal to converts, to people coming from, America, because of, look at all these different sects that you already went through. You went from Christianity to the Nation of Islam to all these different sects that you're being introduced to then finally, having the emphasis of Tawheed, Quran, Arabic language, and the companions. May Allah be pleased with them. So, yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that. But let's get into that. What was the?
And let me just make another point. In 1979, while still in Newark, because I moved from Newark, New Jersey in 1979 to Brooklyn, New York. In 1979, I met a brother, a Sheikh, older than myself, and I'm 73 on the Islamic calendar. He's older than me. At I think it was the Holiday Inn Hotel, there was a conference in down near the airport in Newark, New Jersey. And he was the one that gave me my first introduction to the Aqidah of the Salaf. And that Sheikh, Hafizahullah, may Allah preserve him and reward him, and put all of his work that he's been doing, that he did and has been doing to this day, because he's still with us in Columbia, South Carolina. That Sheikh was Muhammad Sayyid Adli. That was Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Adli. Hafizahullah. He was the one that I first heard the Aqidah of the Salaf.
MashaAllah. All right, so what year is this? This is 79?
79. And there are quite a few things that are left out between 77 and 79. If you want to hear it, I mean, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, of course. We might as well, inshallah.
Go for the gusto, right? Go for the gusto.
That's right.
Okay. In 1977, I'm going to give you those pictures. I still have the pictures. 22, 23, 24 years old. Donnie hooks me up with Sheikh Muhammad Hilmi from Jersey City, hooks me up to go to a conference in Plainfield, Indiana. At that time, it wasn't called ISNA. It was called MSA, right? So we get on this bus going from New Jersey, New York area, on a bus going to this conference. We'll say ISNA, for lack of better words, because like I said, it was originally the Muslim Student Association, which was actually formulated by students who came from the Middle East, and they were studying in colleges and universities. So we get on this bus to go to this now ISNA convention, and I meet quite a few interesting people. One of them was also an Egyptian whose job was instantaneous translation, instantaneous interpreter. He was an instantaneous interpreter, but for the United Nations, they called them revisers. They weren't called interpreters. So he was an instantaneous interpreter. The person would be speaking, he worked at the United Nations, and he would immediately do it like this. He was, seriously trained. He was on that. I got a relationship with him. He was on that bus. And there's also another brother who is a few years older than me also, who I met on that bus. His name was Siraj Wahaj. So this is 1977, right? I meet Siraj Wahaj, we're talking, it's a long trip from New York all the way to Indiana, right? And I get his telephone number. There's no cell phones now. This is only house phones, landlines. So I get his telephone number. And 1979, when I left Newark, New Jersey for reasons that I left and moved to Brooklyn, I didn't know anyone in Brooklyn. I didn't have a job. I had nowhere to live. Nowhere, literally, I had nowhere to live. But I had Siraj Wahaj's telephone number in my wallet. I called Siraj Wahaj. At this time, there was no Masjid Taqwa. It was Masjid, what is now called Masjid Muhsi Khalifa, which is right down the street, less than 5-minute walking from where now Masjid Taqwa is, right? So I called Siraj and I told him, this is Dawood, you met me on the bus going to Indiana, and I need a place to stay. He gave me the keys to the masjid. He only met me on the bus. He gave me the keys to the masjid, and I used to stay in the masjid. And when the people would leave after Isha, I would leave as though I had a place to go. I would go down the street. This is not Masjid Taqwa now. Before Masjid Taqwa, this is the other masjid where it used to be called in the nation a Temple 7C, because 7 is Harlem, 7B I think was Corona, Queens, and 7C was Brooklyn. So when we would leave after Isha, we're talking about 1979, right? 1980. I would go down the street, stand behind a tree. I was doing this regularly because I had nowhere to live. I was staying in the masjid. I would stand behind a tree and watch everybody leave. And then I would go back in and sleep and pray and make dhikr and read Quran. And then when people come for the masjid, they would, wow, this guy is real early, right? And then eventually I ended up marrying his secretary. I married his secretary. We got a job. In fact, I got 2 jobs. The first job was for the Census Bureau. It was a temporary job. And then the second job I got was for the New York State Division for Youth, juvenile corrections. And my ex-wife and I, we were house parents for a house with girls, with wayward girls. And then from that, Siraj went to Chicago, met with W.D. Muhammad, gave W.D. Muhammad his resignation, and then W.D. Muhammad came out to the Masjid Muhsi Khalifa, in acceptance of Siraj's resignation from his organization, his movement, right? I was sitting right there, less than 5 feet in front of W.D. Muhammad when he gave that speech to accept Siraj Wahaj's his resignation, right? So after that resignation, Siraj Wahaj had all of us all the families get together, pool our resources together, and then we opened up, which is still in existence to this day, 1980. We opened up Masjid Taqwa, and from 1980 to 1985, for 5 years, I was the director of Islamic affairs for Masjid Taqwa from 1980 to 1985. And Sheikh Abdul Rauf, Abu Muhammad Abdul Rauf Shakir, who's in Philadelphia now, who graduated from College of Hadith, right? Many people don't know him, but he's, mashallah, may Allah bless him and preserve him and protect him from every evil and disliked thing. He was Siraj's assistant imam, and I was the director of Islamic affairs from 1980 to 1985.
MashaAllah, jazakumullahu for sharing that important history. That's, I guess during this time, as you had mentioned before, at some point, you're introduced to the Salafi Dawa. And I guess what was that sort of transition like amongst all of the different movements that are going around and spreading, and just historically that many people come from, and then being introduced to that, and how did that, I guess, affect the communities?
Being a person that ascribed to Salafia in the 80s, or early 80s, especially still being at Masjid Taqwa. This terminology, Salafi and Salafia, was not a well-known thing, of course, in that community, right? And you have, Barakallahu fikum, may Allah bless you, you have a video that I did of one of the people who really gave me a serious foundation, Sheikh Ahmed Abdul Qabid, who just died when I did that video, rahimahullah. So, and then there was also another person that I got my introduction to Ulum al-Quran, to the science of Quran. He was an African-American who studied at Azhar University. He studied in Beirut, Lebanon. He was the first, to the best of my knowledge, the first American, African-American or otherwise, to be on Lebanese radio speaking in Arabic, an African-American from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He spoke 20 languages. He could read Sanskrit. He could read hieroglyphics. He studied with the famous de facto historian, J.A. Rogers, famous historian, de facto historian. He studied with him. His name was Muhammad Abdul Aziz Al-Harith. I studied the science of Quran with him while in Brooklyn for about 2 or 3 years. And this is before I went to Medina. So I had a really, really good foundation in some of the sciences of Quran and introduction to the science of Hadith and Balagha. I learned Balagha, some elements of Balagha, Ilm al-Bayan, and things like this from Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Aziz Al-Hadar from Philadelphia. So, but in those days, the people who ascribed to Salafia there was no fitna, none. Everybody was together. And we also had a good working relationship with those other masajid in Brooklyn, in Harlem, in Queens or whatever. We had a good working relationship with others because the goal, by the permission of Allah, was to save people, was to salvage relationships and not run people away. As our Prophet ﷺ has stated, bashiru wa la tunaffiru, yassiru wa la tu'assiru, right? Be bringers of glad tidings and don't run the people away. Make it easy on the people and don't make it difficult. For those of us that ascribed to Salafiyya in those days, that's what it was about. It was a call to al-kitab wal-ittiba' wat-tazkiyah, calling to the book of Allah, the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah, following him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and purification of the soul based on the ayah, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. That's what it was based on. That was our call back then. And he taught them the book and the hikmah, which Imam Shafi'i says is the sunnah, and yuzakkihim, to make them purified in their character, in their hearts, to make their souls purified. This is what we call to then, and that's why we were able to get along with those other groups, those other Muslim organizations and masjids during that time. There was basically no type of fitna and discord at that time. In fact, I don't have it anymore. That's long gone now. I had a postcard in 1982 from Noah Hamim Keller, because I had a relationship with him, the one who did the Reliance of the Traveler, the translation of that, right? I had a relationship with him. In fact, that postcard said, Dawood, I'm almost finished with translating Reliance of the Traveler, because I had a relationship with him, So those days were really, those were some of the best days, because in those days, we didn't call to buildings and personalities. We called to Allah. It's like Sheikh Muqbil said, rahimahullah. Sheikh Muqbil said, Ad-du'atu salafiyun yarbutun an-nas bi khaliqihim wa la yarbutunuhum ila shakhsiyatihim. Sheikh Muqbil, rahimahullah, he said that the true Salafi caller He connects the people to their creator. He does not connect the people and tie the people to personalities. That's what we were about then. But
what was the time frame? What years are we talking about?
We're talking about from 1980, 81, 82, and then 85. I left Brooklyn, New York, and got a job, my first job as a chaplain / imam at a state prison, a maximum secure state prison, upstate New York. That was in 1985. And that's when I met my second Ulum al-Quran teacher.
MashaAllah. You know, there's something I wanted to ask you about earlier when we were talking about the Nation of Islam and the different sects. And it was the 5% Nation of Islam. So around this time, you have the Salafi Dawa. MashaAllah, it sounds like a golden age for the Salafi Dawa. But people like myself, we were introduced to like the 5% Nation, I don't know, terminologies and stuff through like hip hop in the 90s and whatnot. But when you were talking about like having knowledge of self back when you were with the Nation and that sort of thing, it reminded me of that. So if you don't mind, I mean, how proliferant was that at the time, and where was, I guess, the Nation of Islam in comparison to Sunni Islam and even different sects of Islam? And then you have the Salafi Dawa. What was all of that, I guess, like during this time?
I mean, as I mentioned, for the most part, there was, and I say between quotes, there was a harmonious situation. Those people, for people like myself and Sheikh Abu Muhammad Abdul Shakir, who was also a member of the Nation of Islam, and Siraj Wahaj, of course, who was a minister in the Nation of Islam under Farrakhan. For those of us who ascribe to Salafia, which were very few, and by the way, some of my teachers that taught me Salafia didn't use the word Salafi. They only would promote the characteristics of Salafia. That's all they promoted. They didn't promote Salafia with the actual term. And then there were others from amongst us who used to go as far as saying Salafi Wahhabi. But we would say, when we said Salafi Wahhabi, we didn't ascribe it to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah. We ascribed it to Allah, who is Al-Wahhab. Al-Wahhab. So we used to say, oh, if you want to call me Wahhabi, okay, I'll accept that. You know, so the condition or the circumstances during that time, more specifically with the 5%ers, I had a very close relationship and intimate contact with 5%ers. Let's go back now from me taking the prison job in 1985. As I mentioned just earlier, from 1980 to 1985, I worked for juvenile corrections. And a lot of the kids who were in that juvenile setting, that juvenile jail setting, they weren't able to go to the state prisons because they were too young, but they had committed the similar or the same crimes as adults, right? Hardened teenagers. We're talking about the early 80s. Many of them were in one of two groups. They were either in the 5% Nation or they were in the Zulu Nation. The 5% Nation or the Zulu Nation, Africa Bambaataa and all that stuff back then. I don't know if you remember that stuff. Maybe you were too young. I don't know.
Well, it's like it's known, I guess, nowadays as like the history of hip hop is sort of.
That's right. That's right. That's right. In fact, I was explaining to some brothers, I'm a real fanatic for etymology, the etymology of words and the history of words and phrases. I'm really big on that in Arabic and in English. And there's an expression that's all over the world now where people say word up, like that, right? So in my opinion, word, which came, the hip hop guys got it from the 5%er guys. And the 5%er guys got it from the Nation of Islam. Because in the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad taught us A Muslim's word is his bond, and his bond is his life. And if his word shall fail, his life should be taken. So then it morphed into word, right? Because you got to keep your word, right? And then word to my mama, and then word up, and then word, you know, like really? Like wallahi, you know, like that. So I remember one time when I was working in the juvenile corrections, I had just prayed Salatul Maghrib. I used one of the residents, the kids' room, to pray Salatul Maghrib. When I came out of, his name was Rajim. His name was Rajim. And I said, do you know who Rajim is? I said, you know, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, right? So I came out of the room after praying Salatul Maghrib, and he said, hey, Adib, how did it feel praying to me? That's terrible, you know, because they believed that they were gods, right? So he asked me, how did it feel praying to me, right? I said, young man, I wasn't praying to you. So those in that relationship, there was a relationship, but it was not volatile. It wasn't a volatile relationship. It wasn't a toxic relationship, because we were in the business of trying to, as I said, by the permission of Allah, and no strength or power from ourselves, saving souls. Basically, the way Salafia was back then, there wasn't a push to use the term Salafia. We used it, and we also used it in our publications, because there were a couple of publications, a couple of national publications that we had. I have some of those magazines, right? But we didn't push it the way it's being pushed now, because what we learned from Shaykh Al-Albani back then, rahimahullah, was that Salafia was used for two basic reasons. Number one, to distinguish ourselves from those people who were promoters and pushers of their ideologies and concepts that were foreign and deviant to the understanding of the Sahaba. That was the first. So to distinguish ourselves from them, we use the terminology Salafi, right? And secondly, to make it as summarized as possible, because as Shaykh Al-Albani taught us, rahimahullah, whom I'm happy to say that I was in his presence 2 times in my life, and used to call him on the phone when I was living upstate New York. He taught us that, you know, if a person wanted to say in one word, I believe in the Quran, I follow the Quran, and the authentic sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way the Sahaba understood it, and those 2 succeeding generations who followed them in righteousness understood it, and all of the Imams who followed their way, the quickest and easiest way to say is, I'm Salafi. But in those days, from what we learned from him, is that we didn't say it pushing it down people's throats. We didn't say it. It was a muqabala type thing. You say you're this, so I say I'm Salafi. You say you're Tablighi, you say you're Ikhwani, you say you're Tahriri, you say you Bilali, you say you're this and you're that. So okay, I'm going to say I'm Salafi. But to go around and saying Salafi bowling match, Salafi picnic, Salafi Hajj, we didn't do that. That kind of stuff we didn't do. You know, we found that to be in contradiction and opposition to what Shaykh Al-Albani was saying, the reason why we use that term Salafi.
Well, I think a clear next step is talking about how it transitioned from like that golden era that you had talked about to what it would later become in terms of leaving that era.
I can't say how. I can only say that it happened. Unfortunately, to me, today, Salafia has been reduced to 3 things. This is my personal opinion. Salafia of today has been reduced to 3 things. Number 1, it has been reduced to personalities. As we mentioned, like from what Sheikh Muqbil said,
Yeah,
right?
that was a perfect quote, mashallah.
If you're with specific personalities, you're going to be considered Salafi. Number two, Salafia has been reduced to brick and mortar edifices, buildings. If you're with or connected to or aligned with specific buildings or organizations, the actual structure, the physical structure, if you go there and you go there, then you're Salafi. And the third thing, to me, as a person who's been ascribing to Salafia for over 40 years, almost 46 years, right? To me, the third thing is Salafia has been reduced to catchphrases and slogans. Catchphrases and slogans. There are certain phrases and slogans that have been put out there that if you use those particular phrases and slogans in a specific contextual way with the two above and that third one, you're Salafi. You're Salafi. In fact, I'll go a little bit further than that. You find some of the brothers that ascribe to Salafiyya, they use certain terminologies. If you're not astute, you won't catch it. Many of them have fallen into the George Bush minhaj. If you're not with us, you're against us, right? If you're not with us, you're against us. So if you listen to some of the terminologies that they use, which we didn't use in those days, and when I say we didn't use them in those days, we didn't use them with the other masjids and centers who didn't ascribe to Salafiyya. We never use what I'm about to say now. But today, we find this, for instance. If you're not with that certain person or persons and that particular building or that organization, that group, that brick and mortar building, and you're not using those catchphrases, then they will say, the brother, Sajid Libham, the brother, Dawud Adib. But when you're with them, it's our brother, so-and-so, our brother, so-and-so. But if it's me, it's the brother. You see? And
so what year did you find this sort of transitioning, over, I guess,
around
to that?
Around the early to mid 90s. The early to mid 90s. So I was introduced to Salafiyya, the Aqidah of the Salaf and the methodology of the Salaf by Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Adli, Hafizahullah, in 1979. Sheikh Ahmed Abdul Qabid, Rahimahullah, and Sharif Abdul Karim, Rahimahullah, and Ibrahim Abdul Aziz, who's still alive to this day. They are the ones that introduced me. I mean, really gave me that real solid foundation. And that's when I became a member of the Quran and Sunnah Society of North America, called QSS, right? In fact, the first conference that we had in the United States, the first Salafi conference in the history of Salafis in the United States, was in the state of Maryland. And the keynote speaker was Sheikh Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. Sheikh Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. And for those who know that history, know about him, that he was very close to Sheikh Rabia. They sat on the same bench, I think, for like 4 years in the college there in Medina. They were very, very close. He was the keynote speaker. In fact, the very famous At-Tasfiyah with Tarbiyah talk that Shaykh Al-Albani gave, I heard that live. Yes.
Well, there's a lot of important history from the 90s that I'd appreciate you inform us regarding. I became Muslim in 2008. So that is, everything in the 90s, even like the early 2000s, I'm not really aware of, but I've just heard, bits and pieces here and there. But I guess like during the 90s, what was it like? Because I know during this time, you as well as others were starting to go abroad. We're starting to study like at the Islamic University of Medina and graduate, learn Arabic, start translating books, doing these conferences with scholars. So there's a lot going on. And it was, a lot of you all, Barakallahu Fikum, are like pioneers. So, I mean, I don't know. Is there anything else that you can share that people might not be aware of but should?
I would say definitely I would say that well, for me, specifically for me, and Allah has allowed me to travel to 23 countries. Before 9/11, I had traveled to like 23 countries. A little bit after 9/11, but things started slowing up because of what was happening. So my traveling was slowed down. But Allah has allowed me to go to exactly 23 countries. And one of the things I used to say when I used to do these talks, sometimes I used to start out my talks saying that my Islamic knowledge didn't come from Medina. The foundation of my knowledge came from America. My Salafia was from America. I didn't learn Salafia in Medina. I was Salafi before I went to Medina. I came to Salafi, introduced to it in 79, came really, for lack of better words, embraced it, embraced it in 81. 85, I went to the prison, as I just mentioned. 87, at the age of 36, after trying since the age of 24 to get into Medina, I finally got in at the age of 36, which was in 1987. I had already been established. In fact, Dr. Bilal Phillips, and I don't sanctify anybody after Allah and glorify anybody after Allah. And Allah is going to take me and all of you to account. Bilal Phillips used to say back then, I don't know of any American that was more prepared to go to the Islamic University of Medina than Dawud Adib. So much so that he was going to do a book. We were going to co-author a book before I went to Medina, right? Before I went to Medina. In fact, going all the way back to the ISNA convention or the MSA convention, it was Dr. Abdul Hakim Quick and Bilal Phillips were supposed to speak. We're talking about 1977. And Dr. Bilal Phillips couldn't make it. And there's a video with the skinny Dawud Adib that was 180 pounds ago, right? Bilal Phillips didn't show up. And I was in the audience. I was a spectator. I was in the audience. I wasn't one of the speakers. I had just took Shahada like 1975. All right. And so Bilal Phillips didn't show up. They asked me to take his place. That video, which is still circulating, especially amongst the prisoners, the inmates in prisons, is called Jinns. It's about jinns and angels. I did that on the fly. I took Bilal Phillips's place on the fly and did that right on the spot. So, so for going fast forwarding again, the 90s, we started seeing changes. I don't know why those changes occurred amongst the Salafis. All I know is that there was a shift, and unfortunately, I became affected by that shift. I went away from what I had learned from Sheikh Al-Albani to something else, right? And so that shift wasn't a call to Salafia in the true sense of the word anymore. It was more of a call to Salafis, not Salafia. It was a call to Salafis under the guise of calling to Salafia. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I mean, when I just reflect on my own experiences and I guess some of the stories I've heard over the years, that seems to be exactly what comes to mind, is that, when it comes to being a Salafi and being with us, it has to do with personalities that you attach yourself to. And if you're not with us, you're against us. And I just remember when I first landed as a student at the Islamic University of Medina in 2010, I was immediately just faced with that. It was just like this. I'm thinking, oh, we're all, Salafis, we're all upon the Sunnah. We're here, students of knowledge, to work together. But it was like immediately in your face. Like, I come from a certain area where I was told, don't be around this person. You have to be with these people. And when I would, as a new Muslim, I'd only been Muslim 2 years. You start asking why, like, where from the Quran and Sunnah are the mistakes you know, they don't have it. It's just, well, this person told me I'm with this person, you know, and it's subhanAllah.
I'll give you two things. One of them actual, the other one is just theoretical. The theoretical one is things have gotten so bad that basic masail al-fiqhiyya, fiqh issues, jurisprudence issues have been manhajified. It's gotten so bad, there's been a manhajification. They have, I'm taking the Arabic word and English word together, you know, a portmanteau, so to speak. There's been a manhajification of issues that don't have anything to do with manhaj. They're fiqh issues, right? If you don't even do certain acts of worship from the aspect of fiqh, you're not upon the manhaj. That's the first thing. The second thing, this actually happened to show you how distorted people's understandings are about true Salafiyya. There was a young man who, and I don't know if it's like that today, in Medina, it was only 5 colleges. At that time in the 80s, it was only 5 colleges. I think they have some other colleges now that are like secular, right? Yeah, but in my days, it was only the Quran, College of Quran, the College of Hadith, the College of Sharia, of which I went to and dropped out. I'm always dropping out, right? The College of Sharia, the College of Dawa, and the College of Arabic language. 5 colleges. There was a young man who got accepted to Medina University. And the first day or two that he was there, he was discussing something with the students and he was extremely upset. Why was he upset, Sajid? He was upset because they didn't have a number 6, TH, a 6th college, the College of Minhaj. He actually was upset. Oh, wow. Why doesn't the university have the College of Minhaj? That's how far we are away from true Salafiyya. He actually understood the way many people that describe the Salafiyya, that Minhaj is this. So you have to have an actual college where you can become a mutakhassis. You can become a specialist in the Minhaj of the Salaf, that you have to have a dedicated college, Kulliyatul Minhaj, a college of Minhaj.
Well, you know, a question comes to mind that maybe you can expound upon is do you think some of these differences came from going to an extreme in certain people attaching themselves to personalities overseas? Because I've seen that weaponized. I've seen, you know, people claiming that they went to a particular sheikh who they say is Salafi and trustworthy, and they'll say that this sheikh said such and such, and sometimes completely lying, completely misrepresenting things, which I've exposed on my channel before clearly. And as a result, people will be completely boycotted. I mean, do you think that that plays into it, that sort of, I don't know, extremism of people attaching themselves to individuals overseas and then even misrepresenting those scholars? That's just one thing that, I don't know, just comes to mind, maybe.
If I didn't know any better, Sajid, I would say that you were trying to set me up and get me in trouble. But
not me. We don't have to. It's the last thing I want to do is get you in any trouble, Sheikh.
You know, but
I think this conversation is going to be very hard to not get in trouble talking about it. But, you know, inshallah khair.
Hey, look, man. I mean, we have the expression, it is what it is. But I add to that, and it ain't what it ain't. So, I mean, you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and swims like a duck and looks like a duck, it's definitely not a rhinoceros.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I don't know what
today, Sajid, I mean, I can understand a guy getting confused and having some vagary or some doubt on a lemon and a lime and a grapefruit. I can understand that. But a person that sees a lemon and he says it's an elephant, or a lemon, he looks at a lemon, he says it's a Statue of Liberty. That's what we're dealing with today. It's all about perception and optics. It's all about perception and optics. There's no real push to have the essence of what Salafiyya is about. And I am guilty. I, Dawud Adib, formerly David White, I am guilty of that. Moving away from what we learned from Sheikh Muhammad Nasruddin Al-Albani to something else.
Well, perhaps you can expound upon that if you don't mind. I mean, what do you think happened to you, or what sort of drew you away from that?
I think for me, one of the main things was wanting, Ibn Khaldun, the great historian who did the book Al-Muqaddimah, he said the human being is a social creature and he doesn't like to be by himself, right? That's why one of the most inhumane and cruel punishments that a person can do to someone, like in prison, is to put them in isolation. That's one of the most severe types of punishment, is to put somebody in what they call a box or put him in the hole where he's not around anybody, because the human being, the human makeup is that they like to be with other people. So if a person feels that they're not going to be with the in crowd, with the status quo, with the group, it's difficult for the average person to say, hey, I'm cool, I'll be by myself. It's difficult for people to be like that. So when a person, in those days, even though I was with certain brothers, I had an independence. Coming from America, my dawah was basically independent. But I needed to be with someone who I deemed at that time could promote and push Salafia in a way that was more organized. See, so that kind of made me veer towards that, the manpower, the resources, the articulation as a group, the ability to write PDFs and make audios and really, this is the way, Salafia. I loved it because I love Salafia. I love Islam. I love Salafia. But at the same time, I lost my GPS, got it rerouting, and that's what happened.
So do you think it was, I guess it's hard to really put a finger on what exactly happened in the cause of it, but I guess, as you mentioned, there's a very strong social dynamic of it. And going back to my experience in Medina, that's what I realized. I realized that there's really two very distinct groups when I was there. There were the quote unquote Salafi brothers, and then there were those that they were warning against. And both of them, it was interesting. They would even have gatherings on like the exact same days at the exact same times. It was really, subhanAllah, how things played out. But I know that what I had to do, I tried to be cool with everyone. And I guess as a new Muslim, people allowed it to an extent, but you really do have to sort of either choose a side or just sort of be by yourself. And I feel like, at least during my time there, more people going and studying and actually learning the religion, there was more people sort of trying to find that balance. But I can definitely see, the reason I'm saying this is because it sounds like you were involved with people who were, calling to Salafia, and maybe you just got caught up in what was going on with them.
No, it wasn't maybe. I did.
Okay.
But I was not upon that at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, Abu Usama al-Dhahabi, he said one of the main things that made him come to Salafia was how I treated him.
MashaAllah.
He used to come to me and ask me questions as a kid, right? He used to come to me at like 21 years of age, something like that, and ask me questions. I remember one time I was in the Masjid in Newark, and he came, it was some type of walima or something like that, and he came with this big, bulky Pakistani Quran with the Arabic, the English, and the transliteration. And he said, Shaykh Dawud, he called me Shaykh Dawud, right? I was older than him. I'm about 13, 14 years older than him, right? He said, can we read this? And I just smiled, and he remembers the answer. I don't remember the answer that I gave him, but he said it was very gentle. It was very tolerant. When he used to be around me, he said I was very, very gentle and very, very tolerant. And he said I used to be able to read the room and be able to not go overboard in running people away. He said that was the thing, one of the main things that made him come to Salafia. And I remember when Sheikh Al-Albani, I had introduced him, Abu Osama, to Salafia, and he used to ask me, he said, Dawud, what is this Salafex stuff, man? What is this Salafex stuff? You know, he didn't even know how to say it, right? And I used to tell him about Shaykh Al-Albani, Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen, Shaykh Al-Baz, but more specifically Shaykh Al-Albani, because with the Quran and Sunnah Society, our relationship was more with Shaykh Al-Albani, right? More than anyone, right? There were others, but this is before Ali Hassan al-Halabi. This is before Usama Qusi. Sheikh Al-Albani was one of the main people, right? So I remember when Sheikh Al-Albani was coming and he was speaking at a hotel, and I don't think that maybe that hotel got torn down by the time you got there. It was 2 hotels around the corner, big hotels. One was the Iberia Hotel, and the other one was the Green Palace. I told Abu Osama, and I told Abu Muslima, I said, Sheikh Al-Albani is going to be here. He's going to be speaking at the Green Palace Hotel after Maghrib. Now, this was going to be the second time I was in his presence, right? I said, you got to come. So made the taslim to the right and the left at the Prophet's Masjid. And me and Abu Muslim, we ran down the street to the Green Palace Hotel. I get to the lobby. I said, where's the Sheikh going to be? The guy said, down there. So we get down there. There's nobody there. I have my cassette tape. I put the cassette tape at the place that I think he's going to be sitting. Abu Muslim is sitting to my right, and Sheikh Al-Albani walks in. Now it's the 3 of us. Comes in. He had this wrinkled towel on. He had this kufi like Ace Juice tray like this, right? He comes in by himself, and he sits down, and then Abu Layla Al-Athari comes in and sits next to him, and then everybody starts coming. So I'm right in front of him. I'm right in front of him. And I remember exactly the question that he answered. I remember it. But the point is that that minhaj that I learned from him was the thing that actually allowed me to go to the WD Muhammad communities, to the Tablighi communities, to the Jamil Al-Amin communities, to the Sheikh Tawfiq communities in Harlem, MIB, to the Sufi communities, to the Ikhwani communities, all of those different masajid. It was what I learned from Sheikh Al-Albani that allowed me to go to those places and be received. And by the permission of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, min ghayri hawlin minni wala quwwa, without any strength nor power from me whatsoever, many people, by the permission of Allah, I don't praise anybody after Allah, many people came to Salafiyah to the point at the Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey, at the Paul Robeson campus. One day in one of the conferences, this was years ago, Dr. Tahir Wyatt was sitting, we said we had a break, and it was about 100 men. And Tahir Wyatt was amongst us. And he said, we got some time between the lectures. Let's just introduce ourselves, for all these. It's about 100 men, literally about 100 men. And he said, let's start with, what is your name and what part of the United States you come from and how you came to Salafiyah. So everybody started giving their names. I'm from Alaska. I'm from Hawaii. I'm from Vermont. I'm from Oklahoma. I'm from Arizona. And I came to Salafiyah by way of Dawud Adib. And I came to Salafiyah by way of Dawud Adib. 4 people out of all those people, and all the praises due to Allah, 4 people out of all of those men said they came to Salafiyah by someone else who came to Salafiyah by way of me. They didn't come to Salafiyah directly because of me. So every single person in that room said they came to Salafiyah either by me or by someone who came by me. Once again, this is not braggadocio. I'm not bragging. I'm only saying that was after Allah's mercy and his fadl upon me, his bounty upon me, and then following the methodology of Shaykh Al-Albani, that was able to happen.
Oh, jazakallah khair. It's important history for us to know about. How did you reach all those different people in all those different states? How did your da'wah extend to that?
You know, there was no TikTok, there was no internet,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
I was physically, literally traveling to those places.
MashaAllah.
So it was 23 countries and all over the United States, television shows outside the United States, radio programs, military bases. I went to Kaiserslautern in Germany. Some of the brothers who are still upon Salafia to this day, right now, I met them in Germany. One of the brothers in Baltimore, Musa, another brother that just went back to Egypt, Mustafa, Abu Abdullah. I met them in Germany and introduced them to Salafia, right? So it was a physical, actually physically, Greece, Italy, Spain, Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore. It was all over, but it was physically going because there was no Facebook, there was no, WhatsApp, there was no internet. So we physically rubbed shoulders with people. We would either stay at a hotel or sleep in the masjid. And just through the mercy of Allah and then kindness and tolerance, people came to Salafia. But unfortunately today, there is something that the sociologists call historical negationism or historical denialism, which shouldn't be conflated with historical revisionism. There is some of the brothers that ascribe to Salafia are now doing what is called historical negationism, where they're trying to remove people like myself from the history by not mentioning me or by not mentioning specific people who had a direct impact even on them. And now they're to the point they're saying, that was nostalgia. Forget that. That wasn't the golden days. That Dawa was weak. That Dawah Adib had, that was weak. But it's the same Dawa that brought you to Salafia. Literally, I'm talking about the same Dawa that brought you to Salafia. Now you're saying it's weak. Right?
Well, there's a lot of questions I want to ask, but I think you mentioning that, what's the issue? Why would somebody want to do that? Remove your name? It's okay. Take your time.
Allahu ya'lamu asrarahum. Allah knows their inner secrets. But I forgive them. I forgive them. I forgive them. Because they know not what they do, seemingly.
Well, maybe I can word it differently to get a bit more of an idea about, because I'm a lot of these things I'm learning for the first time. Like I said, I became Muslim in 2008. Come from a non-Muslim background, non-Muslim community. So it's like, what was it that I don't know. What do you think an issue would be in terms of, everyone who is not with a certain group, that specific group can try to give reasons why that person is a deviant or whatever. I mean, what do you think people allege about you that, I don't know, would lead them to try to not have people listen to you or not even see your name in a history book when they're talking about Salafia? Because I'm really honestly not aware.
What they have specifically with me is probably more of not returning to the way I was when I was with them. One of them said, when a brother came to visit me from Philadelphia about 7 years ago, he said, and I won't mention the person's name who told him, one of them said, so-and-so said, my advice, tell Dawood to go back to refuting people. That was his advice. Not Dawah Adib, fear Allah. Not Dawah Adib, take care of your family. Not Dawah Adib, try to memorize the Quran. Dawah Adib should go back to refuting people.
Well, what kind of refutations were you known for?
Oh man,
you're referring to?
I was one of the noble brothers.
well, just to give the history, I mean, even if you've since changed your ways and everything, I think it's important.
All right, I'll give you an example. The relationship that I had with Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Adli. Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Adli, which was similar to Siraj. Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Adli and I were so close, he offered me his oldest daughter, his firstborn daughter, in marriage. Siraj Wahad, same thing. He offered me his firstborn daughter in marriage, right? So my relationship with Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Adli was extremely close. Because I had went in another direction, I started refuting him simply because he didn't accept the term Salafi. So I started, astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh, started saying publicly in lectures, Muhammad Sayyid Sadli, instead of Muhammad Sayyid Adli, right? And I've been estranged from him since then. It's been over 20-something years now, right?
Is there anything you'd like to say to him?
I've already apologized. I've already apologized to him and maybe 6 or 7 other people, and even that was frowned upon, to the point where some of the brothers now, some of the noble brothers, they call me Abu Apology because I've apologized.
You saying this is
I'm not
starting
saying,
to make
I'm not
things...
saying I agree. I'm not saying I agree with everything that some of those people that I apologize to do, and some of the things that they espouse and some of the things they believe in, but to unjustly, oppressively say something about a Muslim that's not true. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it says in his book that they say something that to them it's hayyinan. They see it as something slight. وَهُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ. But with Allah, that statement is tremendous. So I'm 73 years old. Allah only knows. This video right here, this interview, we could stop it. I could drop dead. I specifically, personally, know a person that made taslim to the right and didn't make taslim to the left after Fajr one day at a masjid in Brooklyn. He made taslim to the right and didn't make it to the left. I'm going to stand in front of Allah. ألا يظن أولئك أنهم مبعوثون ليوم عظيم يوم يقوم الناس لرب العالمين. Do they not think that they are going to stand in front of Allah, the Lord of the worlds, on that tremendous day? You and I are going to stand in front of Allah. I don't want to say one kalima unjustifiably against a person that I won't be able to stand in front of Allah and answer for that. I want to be able to stand in front of Allah. I don't want to get to the qantara, I don't want to get to that bridge after the sirat and just be held up, because only Allah knows. Only Allah knows who has taqwa. Only Allah knows who has tazkiyah, who's sanctified. Only Allah knows. I know that Salafi is the truth. I know that. And I know that there's no other aqidah or methodology other than the way of the Salaf. I'm a firm believer in that. But some of this stuff, it ain't Salafiyah.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. May Allah preserve you. And I appreciate you, opening up about these things. I'm sure it's not easy, but it is, at least for me, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers, it's helping kind of picture what exactly may have happened. It's like finding out that Salafi is the truth after, as we also mentioned, that history of so many different sects, just completely astray sects, finding Salafi and the beauty of it and it thriving, and then reaching a point where I guess it sounds like what had happened is just communally, socially being very harsh and refuting people and boycotting people for very minor things, sometimes not even a mistake, perhaps. And then that really, I guess, tore apart a lot of communities. And then it sounds like you changed your ways from that. You repented from that. You apologized for whatever parts you took in that. And then, of course, you leaving, doing that, those people are going to then come after you. It sounds. Yeah,
and I repeat, I have not left Salafiyah, and I had not left the methodology of the Salaf. I've only returned to my roots. My roots is the same thing that Sheikh bin Baz, Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen, and Shaykh Al-Albani used to teach. That's what I was upon in the 80s. And that's what I returned to. I didn't leave, as some brothers have said. I've read it with my own eyes. They used a statement of one of the imams of the Salaf that you find in Ibanatul Kubra, Ibn al-Battah, that the dalala, haqq dalala, that true misguidance is that you confirm and affirm, now you deny it, and that thing that you denied or rejected, now you confirm it. And they use this in a way that is totally incorrect. They take that statement, which is not revelation, by the way. It's not wahi min fawqa sab'a samawat. It's not from above the heavens. It's the statement from one of the imams of the Salaf. Nonetheless, it's true. But to say that if somebody wants to retract, to make taraja on something that they said that was incorrect, then that statement of that noble imam of the past, it has no bearing whatsoever. How many of the ulama of the past changed their views on certain things, whether it was a hadith or fiqh issue or even an issue of aqeedah? They saw things differently because Allah had mercy on them to be able to see. The more knowledge you get, as some, like Imam Shafi and others say, the more a man's knowledge is widened and expanded, the more tolerant and flexible and forbearing he becomes. The more the person's knowledge becomes widened and expanded, the more mercy he has. The more mercy he has. And this is what I am upon. I am upon, by the permission of Allah, trying to get people to see that the way of Islam is not Ash'ariyya, not Maturidiyya, not Mu'tazila or I'tizaliyya. It's not any of these things. That it is Salafia, and I am firm on that. It is Salafia. But at the same time, it is not a call to shakhsiyya. It is not a call to worshiping or aggrandizing personalities. I am not going to be asked in the grave about Sheikh so-and-so. I'm going to be asked in the grave those questions that our beloved Prophet Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi wa barakatuh said that we're all going to be asked about in that grave. Nothing more, nothing less. That's what I'm concerned with. I'm not going to be asked about Shaykh Al-Albani, Sheikh bin Baz. I'm not going to be asked about them in the grave. I'm going to be asked about Allah, who's your Rabb, and men Rabbuk. Rabb here is not Rububiyyah. It's Uluhiyyah. Just like in the Quran, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Rabb? That's not Rububiyyah there. That's Uluhiyyah. I'm going to be asked, who is my Ilah, my Ma'bud, my Ma'luh? I'm going to be asked about who is the one I worship, not the one who created me, the one who sends down the rain, the one who makes the clouds move. I'm not going to be asked about a sheikh. I'm going to be asked about that, who's my prophet. I'm going to be asked about what is my way of life, not what building did you go to, what masjid do you attend, what conference. Man, get out of here with that stuff.
Yes, subhanAllah, I think you articulated the dilemma of the term now, Salafi, because as you said, you never left Salafia, but what is meant by Salafia and what has Salafia come to be known by certain people today? That's sort of something that it's a struggle to navigate.
Salafia has isma. It has isma because it's an ascription to those people who have isma or infallibility as a collective group. The best example is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a person, and the best example as a community of people are the Sahaba, and that's what I call to. Nothing more and nothing less.
With that said, I did want to ask you, when you were traveling and giving talks and calling people to Salafia, and so many people were coming to Salafia by, alhamdulillah, after hearing these talks, what specifically, if you could summarize, I'm sure we don't have time to hear everything, but like, what are some of the main points that you felt, open their hearts to Salafia in terms of what you were called?
There was a brother who was an assistant imam of a W.D. Muhammad Masjid in Philadelphia. It just so happens Allah had decreed, had written and occurred that we would be in close proximity in the tents, our tents on in Mina. So I was asked to do a talk. So it's a bunch of people sitting there from all walks of life, you know. And one of them was this assistant imam, rahimahullah. I found out later on that he died, right? So I'm doing the talk, like 10 minutes, 12 minutes, something like that. Assistant imam from a W.D. Muhammad community in Philly. I think it was Ogans, that area. I think it was Masjid Allah, to be exact, Masjid Allah. And so he said, man, brother, you know, he took out his notebook and everything, his address book. He said, that talk was so beautiful. He said, that talk was so beautiful. He said, can I get your name and your address? I said, yeah, sure. Because Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen told me, always answer the people, you know, don't turn them away, always be accessible to the people, right? That's what he told me to my face, Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah. So I said, sure. So I said, Dawud Adib. He said, what? Just like this. He said, what? And it's a bunch of people sitting there on Mina in the tent. He said, you're the Dawud Adib, the monster? This is what he said. He said, you're Dawud Adib, the monster? And I said, yeah, I guess so, man. What can I say? Unfortunately, I'm not Dawud Adib. He said, man, what you said in this talk, he said, we say the same thing in our masjid. He said, I'm going to stay in contact with you. That's what he said. And there were many people that like I said, there were many, by the permission of Allah, not from me with my weak, nostalgic dawah. It was from Allah. Many people from the WD community came to Salafia. Many of them. I'm not talking about a few, many of them.
Alhamdulillah. Are there any classic lectures online of this time period and the sort of thing that you say that we can maybe direct the people to?
From me?
Yeah, because I'm looking to get a taste of like what specifically you were saying to call the people that we could benefit from and learn from, and we're also inviting people and giving da'wah, and you know. I mean, maybe times have changed, but I know the underlying message remains the same. But
I would. Are you asking for a specific genre, or just
like specifically? I'm just, you know, I'd love to sort of travel back in time and hear, you know, like what you were saying to the people that resonated with them, for them to, you know, answer the call to Salafia and whatnot, especially coming from those backgrounds. Like,
you know, I don't know many of the recordings, unfortunately. There are some recordings that are online that some people have. I didn't have a lot of those recordings because those recordings were either lost or literally thrown away.
Yes.
Literally. And I'm talking about me seeing them with my own eyes being put together in hefty garbage bags. The garbage, like the big black hefty garbage bags, and thrown into the dumpster. I saw this with my own eyes. So there are.
Understood. Understood. Khair, inshallah.
So, but there are some. There are some that I can probably get my hands on. One of them is called "And When It Was Time to Be Serious, They Were Men." And it was time to be serious, there was men. That was a talk I gave because at one time in the 90s, I was doing what I called the Al-Adib al-Mufrad tour. The Al-Adib al-Mufrad tour. I was doing hadith explanations from hadith from the book by Imam al-Bukhari called Al-Adib al-Mufrad, right? Which I guess you can call it the incomparable characters and manners of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's a narration in there that said that the companions, when they would just be, excuse the expression, cooling out, they were on an expedition or whatever, on a journey, and they would just be sitting around, like men, they're human beings. And they would be eating watermelons. And after they finished eating the watermelons, they would take the rinds of the watermelons and throw them at each other, right? So the narration said that they used to do that after they finished eating the watermelons. They would throw the rinds, the watermelon rinds at each other, playing, ducking them. As like today, I don't know if I should talk about paintball in this interview, but they said, throw the watermelons at each other and duck and hit each other and laugh. But the narration says at the end, but when it was time to be serious, they were men. I did a talk on that.
Yeah. I think this is a good time to actually let the people know they should go and subscribe to your YouTube channel. Check the links in the description. And perhaps you can, if you come across any of these old lectures, you can upload them to your channel. Now that people have heard more of the history, I'm sure many would love to go back and hear some of those things and also benefit from your new videos. You have a lot of new videos that you've been posting, very beneficial. JazakumAllahukhairan. So check the links in the description and go subscribe. And I think, for this episode, this interview, perhaps we can wrap things up maybe leading up to September 11th, 2001, because I think that's an important point where things changed. So I guess for the rest of the 90s leading up to that, is there anything else that you'd like to include and mention? And then we can take off from there, perhaps in the next interview, inshallah.
I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, very much earlier in this interview, that I had some teachers, some from Egypt. I didn't mention those from Pakistan, and some who were African American. And for the most part, maybe 60 to 65% of them were actually Ikhwani. And when I use the terminology Ikhwani, I know that there are two types of Ikhwani. There are the actual Ikhwanis, people who are members of the Muslim Brotherhood, sign their signatures on the document with Hassan al-Banna's picture, and they actually make a pledge of allegiance to him. Now he's dead and gone, through whoever is the head. And then the other type of the Ikhwani are those who have some of the concepts and the ideologies and the methodologies of the Ikhwan. They're not actually card-carrying signature on the document Ikhwanis, but they have the concepts of the Ikhwan. My teachers, some of them, the majority of the ones that were teaching me in those days, some I've mentioned, some I didn't, like Muhammad Ali al-Hanuti, who used to be the Imam, rahimahullah, of I think the Dar al-Hijra in Falls Church in Virginia. He was one of my teachers, right? I learned Tafsir Ibn Kathir from him, and I learned Bidayatul Mujtahid wa Nihayatul Muqtasid Ibn Rushd from him. I learned Tafsir Fathul Qadir Shawkani from him here in Brooklyn, right? But he was an Ikhwani, an actual Ikhwani. Sheikh Muhammad Hilmi from Jersey City was an actual Ikhwani. Sheikh, that I didn't mention, Sheikh Abdul Muta'al al-Jabri, my second teacher of the science of Quran, was, not only was he an Ikhwani, he was taught by Hassan al-Banna himself. He was taught by Hassan al-Banna himself, and he was tortured under the regime, the presidency of Anwar Sadat, and he sought asylum in New York, upstate, in the Schenectady, Albany area, and that's where I met him, because I was living upstate as a chaplain, right, when I left from Brooklyn. So that's where I was connected to him. And so they were Ikhwani. So you mentioned the 90s up to the 2000s. Quite a few of the people who are Salafi in their Aqidah were a part of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. And some of your viewers may say, how can that be? Okay, well, we can discuss it. But before we discuss it, go listen to what Sheikh Al-Albani and others say, that there are people who were Salafi in the Muslim Brotherhood. They were Salafi in the Muslim Brotherhood. and we're not going to open up any of these cans of worms and start talking about some of those personalities that were Ikhwani, real Ikhwani, bona fide, grade A, government inspected, 24-karat Ikhwanis. But they had Salafi Aqidah. So that led to 911. And unfortunately, one of our brothers, I won't say the brother, I'll say one of our brothers, did something that may Allah forgive him for, and it made my name be amongst those people between the first World Trade Center bombing and the second World Trade Center bombing. I was one of those people that was put on that list of the, and this is not, I'm not hiding it because you can find it on the internet. I was one of those people that was put on the list of alleged, unindicted co-conspirators to the first World Trade Center bombing. And here I am today, still here, no problems. And, my Dawa continued, even though it really took me for a loop, traveling airports, being pulled off planes and being put in rooms for 5 and 6 hours with cold air conditioning and interrogated and, the whole 9 yards,
Yeah,
just to spread Salafia.
I was going to say we could stay here for hours because that does sort of open up a whole new topic that we could discuss maybe for another day. But I just want to say, may Allah preserve you. Jazakallah khair. May Allah make this interview beneficial, and may Allah allow us to do many more beneficial interviews. And I want to encourage everybody to, again, subscribe, check the links in the description so that they can follow Shaykh Dawud Adib. And inshallah, I'll give you the last word if there's anything else that you'd like to say before going.
I would like to say that ask Allah to keep you and protect you from being a blind follower. In the methodological sense, not in the sense of jurisprudence, because the layman or the non-student of knowledge eventually is going to have to follow someone blindly, whether it be in the issues of fiqh or the issues of hadith, because the layman doesn't have the propensity, he doesn't have the tools, he doesn't have the utensils, he or she doesn't have the equipment to determine if an issue of fiqh is the qawl al-rajih or the qawl al-marjuh, is the weightier opinion or the less weightier opinion. Likewise, they don't have the ability to determine if a hadith is sahih lidatihi, sahih lighayrihi, hasan, mawdu', munqati', muttarib. He doesn't have the ability to do that, so he's going to have to blindly follow someone in fiqh issues and hadith issues, and even sometimes in issues of aqeedah, he's going to or she's going to have to blindly follow. But when it comes to personalities, when it comes to talking about people, refutations should never be done away with. Refutations has not been canceled. Refutations is a part of Islam and it's a part of Salafia. But you better be careful when you talk about somebody blindly following someone else, no matter how high the status is of that person, scholar or otherwise, talking about another Muslim's honor and his reputation and his name. When it comes to that type of blind following, you better be careful, buddy. It's going to be a rough ride.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Thank you so much. May Allah guide all of us and protect us.
Ameen.
And again, everyone, make sure that you subscribe to Shaykh Dawud Adib's channel and let us know if you have any questions that perhaps you'd like him to answer in the next interview, inshallah. And jazakumAllahukhairan. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanaka wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.